It began with a single phrase whispered through the private corridors of Windsor Castle: "The succession must be protected." Within hours, palace vehicles were rerouted, senior aides vanished behind closed doors, and Queen Camilla's inner circle reportedly found themselves locked out of conversations they once controlled. Then came the image that stunned royal watchers everywhere. Prince William standing beside Lady Louise Windsor, calm and resolute, as if a new chapter of the monarchy had already begun. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the palace attempted to dismiss the growing speculation as nothing more than exaggerated chatter from royal observers hungry for fresh drama. But insiders whisper that something unusually serious had unfolded behind the walls of Windsor just days earlier. According to various interpretations of private palace meetings, Prince William had convened a confidential strategy session involving Princess Anne, senior constitutional advisors, and several longtime members of the royal household, trusted by the late Queen Elizabeth II herself. The gathering reportedly took place away from the usual ceremonial offices, fueling immediate concern among staff who rarely witnessed that level of secrecy unless the institution itself faced a moment of vulnerability. And vulnerability, according to those close to the royal household, had become impossible to ignore. King Charles's ongoing health struggles had reportedly accelerated conversations that many believed were still years away. Palace administrative streams, ranging from security reshuffles to internal scheduling revisions, allegedly pointed toward a quiet restructuring already underway behind the scenes. But what shocked royal insiders most was not simply the existence of those discussions. It was who suddenly appeared at the center of them. Lady Louise Windsor, long considered one of the monarchy's most overlooked younger royals, reportedly found herself pulled into conversations surrounding the future public face of the crown. Reports suggest Prince William had become increasingly focused on elevating royals he viewed as disciplined, discreet, and untouched by years of scandal surrounding the institution. And in the eyes of many within the old guard, Louise represented exactly that. Quiet, loyal, uncontroversial, a Windsor untouched by the chaos that had consumed so many others. The timing, however, could not have been more explosive. Sources close to the palace claim Queen Camilla's wider family circle had privately assumed their influence inside royal operations would naturally expand, as Charles leaned more heavily on trusted personal relationships during his illness. Yet according to insiders, the exact opposite may now be unfolding. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes were reportedly absent from several upcoming royal planning discussions, despite expectations they would maintain informal visibility around key ceremonial events tied to the king's reign. That silence quickly became impossible to ignore. Royal correspondents began noting subtle but telling changes: increased protection around Lady Louise during recent Windsor appearances, adjustments to seating arrangements during private engagements, a growing number of senior aides assigned specifically to William's future-facing projects rather than Charles's current court. Then came the moment that truly ignited speculation across social media and palace circles alike. William appearing publicly beside Louise during a quiet Windsor engagement, speaking with a level of warmth and confidence usually reserved for senior working royals. For seasoned royal watchers, symbolism inside the monarchy is never accidental. Every appearance, every gesture, every carefully timed photograph carries meaning. And many began interpreting William's sudden alignment with Louise as something far larger than simple family support. Royal commentators from the Times to Tatler quietly floated theories of a next-generation reset, one designed to restore what palace traditionalists allegedly believe the monarchy has lost over the past turbulent decade: discipline, restraint, and unquestioned loyalty to the institution above personal ambition. But beneath the carefully managed public image, tensions were reportedly rising fast. Different interpretations of internal conversations describe a growing divide between those loyal to the old structures surrounding King Charles and those increasingly rallying behind William's long-term vision for the crown. Some insiders even claim Princess Anne herself had become one of the strongest advocates for reinforcing the monarchy around bloodline duty rather than expanding influence through marriage alliances or social proximity. And perhaps most chilling of all was the realization slowly spreading through palace corridors. This did not feel temporary, it felt planned, deliberate, almost surgical in its execution. The sudden elevation of Lady Louise was not being treated as a sentimental gesture toward a quieter royal cousin. Reports suggest it was being framed internally as part of something much larger, a recalibration of trust inside the House of Windsor itself. Because behind the polished smiles and carefully controlled public appearances, a deeper question was now emerging inside Britain's most guarded institution. Who would truly shape the monarchy after Charles? Who would stand beside William when the transition finally came? And perhaps most dangerously of all, who would quietly be left behind when that new royal order finally revealed itself to the world? But this was never simply about appearances. It was the opening move in a far deeper battle over who truly belongs within the sacred machinery of the crown. For years, Lady Louise Windsor lived quietly beyond the glare of palace warfare, overshadowed, underestimated, and almost invisible beside louder royal figures. Yet behind the scenes, reports suggest the late Queen Elizabeth II viewed her very differently. According to royal insiders, Louise represented something increasingly rare inside the House of Windsor: restraint, loyalty, and absolute silence. While other royal figures dominated headlines through controversy, emotional interviews, and carefully managed public reinventions, Louise reportedly grew up inside a very different royal world. Built not around celebrity, but around discipline. Sources close to the Edinburgh household have long described Prince Edward and Sophie as determined to raise their children with a quieter understanding of duty, shielding them from the dangerous excesses of palace attention that had consumed so many members of the family before them. Unlike the increasingly theatrical culture surrounding parts of the modern monarchy, Louise's upbringing was said to revolve around structure, humility, and service without applause. And perhaps that difference mattered far more than anyone realized. According to palace insiders, Queen Elizabeth II developed a deep affection for Louise, not simply because she was one of her youngest granddaughters, but because she reminded the late monarch of an older royal code that many feared was disappearing from the institution entirely. Reports suggest the Queen admired Louise's calm temperament, her refusal to chase public attention, and her apparent comfort living far away from the endless cycles of palace drama. In a monarchy increasingly shaken by media warfare, memoirs, leaks, and public betrayals, Louise allegedly became symbolic of something stabilizing, almost old-fashioned in the eyes of senior courtiers. That symbolism reportedly grew even stronger through her connection to Prince Philip's legacy. Those familiar with the family often point to Louise's passion for carriage driving, the sport Philip loved deeply during his later years, as more than a simple hobby. Palace staff quietly interpreted it as a continuation of the Edinburgh Line's values: discipline, endurance, and resilience without complaint. While modern royal culture increasingly drifted toward branding, publicity strategies, and social influence, Louise's image remained tied to quieter traditions that many within the old guard believed the monarchy desperately needed to preserve. And inside the palace, that contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. Various interpretations of internal royal discussions suggest Prince William himself had taken particular notice of Louise during some of the monarchy's most turbulent moments. As the Sussex controversies intensified and public tensions fractured the royal household, insiders claim William grew increasingly distrustful of personalities who appeared drawn towards spectacle rather than stability. Amid accusations, televised grievances, and escalating divisions inside the family, Louise reportedly remained silent. No interviews, no emotional briefings, no attempts to leverage royal proximity for visibility. According to sources familiar with William's thinking, that silence carried enormous weight. Some palace staff even began referring to her privately as the Invisible Windsor. Not as an insult, but as a recognition of how effectively she had managed to avoid the institutional chaos engulfing others around her. While louder personalities consumed headlines across Britain and America, Louise quietly represented the opposite model of royal survival: invisibility through loyalty. But behind that silence, anxiety was reportedly growing within senior royal circles. Concerns about the monarchy's long-term stability had intensified dramatically since King Charles's illness became a central issue inside palace operations. The fear, according to several royal commentators, was no longer just about public popularity, it was about preserving the very structure of the institution itself. Who could truly be trusted once William inherited the crown? Which royals understood the difference between serving the monarchy and using it? And slowly, almost invisibly, William's answer to that question appeared to be taking shape. Reports suggest the Prince of Wales had already begun imagining a streamlined monarchy built around a smaller circle of bloodline royals whose loyalty to the institution remained unquestioned. Not celebrities, not extended personalities orbiting the crown, but disciplined figures capable of preserving what many traditionalists describe as the sacred continuity of the House of Windsor. Within that emerging vision, Lady Louise reportedly occupied a place far more significant than the public yet understood. Because while much of the world still viewed her as a forgotten royal tucked quietly into the background, insiders whisper that inside palace calculations, her importance was beginning to rise at exactly the same moment another faction realized its own influence may finally be slipping away. And as Louise quietly rose inside palace calculations, another faction reportedly realized its influence was beginning to collapse. The silence surrounding Camilla's family was not accidental. According to multiple palace observers, invitations stopped arriving, private consultations vanished, and old assumptions about future influence suddenly evaporated. For the Parker Bowles faction, the message reportedly felt devastatingly clear. The gates of royal power were quietly closing. What made the shift so unsettling inside royal circles was not that it happened publicly, but that it happened almost invisibly. There were no dramatic announcements, no official statements, no confrontation anyone could point to directly. Instead, according to insiders familiar with palace operations, changes unfolded through quiet omissions and subtle institutional distancing. Names once included in private gatherings reportedly disappeared from guest lists. Informal consultations that had become routine during the early years of Charles and Camilla's reign allegedly stopped without explanation. And perhaps most revealing of all, senior aides connected to Prince William's office were said to be tightening control over who gained access to future-facing royal discussions. For years, Camilla's wider family circle had occupied a delicate but carefully managed position around the monarchy. While never official working royals, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes were still viewed as part of the king's extended domestic world, protected by proximity and personal loyalty. But palace administrative streams now suggest that dynamic may have changed dramatically as William intensified preparations for the future of the crown. According to various interpretations of internal restructuring efforts, the Prince of Wales had reportedly begun reducing the informal privileges previously enjoyed by individuals viewed as existing adjacent to royal authority, rather than directly within its bloodline structure. And inside palace walls, people noticed. Reports suggest ceremonial visibility became one of the first areas affected. Invitations to smaller strategic gatherings reportedly narrowed. Social privileges once quietly extended through Charles' court allegedly became less consistent. Royal commentators began observing that figures once casually connected to elite Windsor functions were suddenly nowhere to be seen. To the public, these absences may have appeared meaningless, but within the rigid ecosystem of monarchy, absence can speak louder than presence. The growing authority of the alliance between Prince William and Princess Anne only intensified that perception. According to sources close to the institution, Anne had become increasingly influential during Charles's health struggles, operating as both protector of royal continuity and guardian of what insiders often call the old discipline of the monarchy. William, meanwhile, reportedly leaned heavily on Anne's experience as he quietly reshaped the structure surrounding his future reign. Together, palace insiders claim, they formed an increasingly powerful internal bloc committed to preserving the monarchy through ruthless institutional clarity rather than emotional compromise. Within staff circles, whispers of something called the Here's Accord reportedly began circulating, a phrase used to describe William's alleged long-term strategy to consolidate the monarchy around trusted senior royals with unquestioned loyalty to the crown itself. Whether the term officially exists remains unclear. But according to those familiar with palace dynamics, the philosophy behind it was unmistakable. The future monarchy would be smaller, tighter, and far less tolerant of competing influence networks orbiting the institution. For Camilla, reports suggest the transition has been deeply frustrating. While publicly maintaining composure, insiders claim she has grown increasingly aware that the center of royal gravity is shifting away from Charles' personal court and toward William's emerging power structure. Some royal observers even argue that Queen Consort's greatest challenge is not public criticism, but the quiet realization that time itself is working against her position. Charles's reign, while historic, is increasingly viewed within palace calculations as transitional. William's reign, however, is viewed as permanent architecture for the monarchy's next era. That reality reportedly placed enormous emotional pressure on the king himself. Sources close to royal operations describe Charles as torn between personal loyalty to Camilla and his lifelong understanding that the monarchy must always survive beyond individual relationships. Different interpretations of recent private meetings suggest the king has struggled emotionally, with the growing divide forming between his wife's extended circle and the future-focused structure William appears determined to build. Some insiders even claim Charles hoped the two worlds could coexist peacefully, but the deeper palace tensions became, the harder that balance allegedly proved to maintain. Meanwhile, Laura Lopez reportedly retreated further from public royal association altogether, while Tom Parker Bowles appeared increasingly absent from gatherings where his presence once felt natural. Royal commentators quickly framed the broader situation as something much larger than family tension. To them, this was about the monarchy reasserting its oldest principle: duty before personal attachment, institution before blended family politics. And perhaps most significantly, insiders began noticing one name appearing more and more frequently at the exact moment another family's visibility began fading into silence: Lady Louise Windsor. Because behind the scenes, reports suggest her rise was not unfolding randomly at all. It was part of something far more calculated, far more deliberate, and far more revealing about William's long-term intentions for the crown. But the real shock came when palace insiders began linking Louise's rise to a strategy personally shaped by William himself. Insiders now whisper that Prince William has activated what senior courtiers privately call the Crown Preservation Doctrine, quiet but ruthless campaign to secure the monarchy against instability before he ascends the throne. And at the center of that doctrine stands Lady Louise. According to various interpretations of palace strategy meetings, William's thinking has been shaped by one overwhelming fear: that the monarchy could slowly lose its authority if it continues drifting toward personality-driven celebrity culture instead of disciplined institutional service. For years, the House of Windsor has endured scandal after scandal played out not behind palace gates, but across television screens, streaming platforms, memoirs, interviews, and social media warfare. And insiders claim William views that era as deeply damaging, not only to the family itself, but to the long-term survival of the crown. That is why, according to those familiar with internal royal planning, the Prince of Wales has allegedly become determined to build an entirely different future around himself. A future where loyalty matters more than popularity, where silence is valued over publicity, where service comes before status. And within that vision, Lady Louise reportedly represents something almost symbolic: a living rejection of the chaos William believes nearly destabilized the monarchy during one of the most turbulent periods in modern royal history. Sources close to palace operations suggest Louise's growing importance has less to do with personal affection and more to do with what she represents institutionally. Unlike figures who became associated with media campaigns, public grievances, or expanding personal brands, Louise reportedly embraced a life almost completely detached from royal performance culture. No calculated visibility, no attempts to dominate headlines, no desire to transform royal identity into celebrity influence. According to insiders, that restraint has become extraordinarily valuable in William's eyes, and he is reportedly not making these decisions alone. Princess Anne, often described by palace staff as the monarchy's ultimate enforcer of discipline, is said to have become one of William's closest behind-the-scenes advisors during this transition period. Different interpretations of recent royal restructuring efforts suggest Anne has quietly encouraged William to reinforce the institution around royals, whose commitment to duty remains unquestioned. To Anne, according to royal commentators, monarchy has never been about personal comfort or emotional validation. It is endurance, sacrifice, obligation. And insiders whisper that William increasingly shares that philosophy. That alignment has reportedly triggered a series of subtle but powerful administrative reshuffles within palace operations. While the public sees only ceremonies and appearances, those working behind royal walls allegedly see something very different unfolding beneath the surface. Staffing assignments shifting, communication structures tightening, visibility being strategically redistributed. Reports suggest William has gradually increased the prominence of royals viewed as reliable institutional figures while quietly reducing dependence on personalities connected to distraction or controversy. And once again, Lady Louise's presence keeps resurfacing inside those calculations. Royal insiders have even begun drawing comparisons between Louise and the young Queen Elizabeth II, not in terms of rank or destiny, but temperament, reserved, careful, measured. According to those familiar with palace culture, William deeply admires figures who understand that monarchy survives not through emotional exposure, but through controlled restraint. In Louise, some courtiers reportedly see echoes of an older royal model the institution fears losing forever. At the same time, reports suggest William has grown increasingly distrustful of what some aides privately call outside influence networks surrounding the monarchy. These include social figures, unofficial advisors, extended family dynamics, celebrity relationships, and media-connected circles capable of shaping narratives beyond palace control. According to insiders, William believes those networks weakened the crown's authority during recent years by blurring the line between monarchy and entertainment. That belief reportedly explains why Camilla's reduced influence is being interpreted by many royal commentators not as personal punishment, but as institutional recalibration. Sources close to the palace insist William's strategy is less about hostility toward Camilla herself and more about narrowing the monarchy's center of gravity around direct bloodline continuity and trusted service. To his supporters, it is viewed as pragmatic protection. To critics, it appears cold and unforgiving. But either way, insiders claim the shift is very real, and perhaps the most unsettling part for those watching the developments unfold is how methodical everything reportedly feels. Nothing rushed, nothing impulsive, just a gradual tightening of royal structure around a future William appears to have been preparing for far longer than the public realizes. Every move, every reshuffle, every carefully elevated figure seemingly tied to one larger objective: securing the monarchy before the next reign officially begins. Yet while William consolidated the future, the emotional toll on King Charles reportedly became impossible to ignore. King Charles reportedly never imagined his final years would become a battlefield between loyalty and legacy. Exhausted by illness and mounting internal tensions, the monarch now appears trapped between the woman he fought decades to marry and the son preparing to inherit everything. For much of his life, Charles waited for the crown under the immense shadow of Queen Elizabeth II, believing that once his reign finally arrived, it would bring a sense of peace and personal fulfillment long denied to him. But according to palace insiders, the reality unfolding behind Windsor's walls has become painfully different. Instead of stability, his reign now appears consumed by uncertainty. Instead of unity, the institution around him reportedly feels increasingly divided into competing factions, preparing for an inevitable transition no one openly dares to discuss. And hanging over all of it is the relentless reality of his health struggles. Reports suggest Charles's ongoing treatment has forced senior royal operations into a state of quiet contingency planning, unlike anything seen since the final years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. While the palace continues projecting calm continuity in public, insiders claim internal discussions surrounding the monarchy's future have accelerated dramatically behind closed doors. The issue, according to those close to royal administration, is no longer whether preparation is happening, but how far those preparations have already gone. That pressure has reportedly transformed William's role almost overnight. According to various interpretations of palace restructuring, the Prince of Wales has gradually shifted from heir apparent to active architect of the monarchy's next era. Sources familiar with the situation claim William has intensified planning surrounding future royal visibility, institutional streamlining, and succession-era operations with a level of urgency that reflects growing concern about long-term stability. And while many inside the palace reportedly support his determination, others fear the speed of these shifts is creating emotional fractures impossible to fully repair. Because at the center of those fractures stands Queen Camilla. Reports suggest Camilla has become increasingly focused on protecting the long-term status and security of her family as uncertainty around Charles's reign deepens. After decades spent fighting for acceptance inside the monarchy, insiders claim she fears what could happen once William formally assumes control of the institution. Royal commentators have noted that Camilla's influence, while still significant during Charles's reign, may not automatically survive into the next royal era with the same authority or protection. And Charles, according to those closest to him, allegedly feels every part of that tension. Sources describe the king as emotionally exhausted, increasingly withdrawn, and deeply burdened by the realization that the two worlds he spent years trying to unite may now be drifting permanently apart. On one side stands the woman he sacrificed public reputation, political stability, and decades of criticism to eventually marry. On the other stands his eldest son, carrying the weight of protecting the monarchy in an age where public trust feels more fragile than ever before. Insiders whisper that Charles understands William's concerns intellectually, but emotionally, the situation has become devastatingly painful. Palace staff reportedly began noticing the divide more clearly in recent months. According to administrative sources, the royal household increasingly feels split between what aides privately call the Old Court and the Future Court. The Old Court revolves around Charles's personal relationships, loyalties, and long-standing emotional ties. The Future Court, however, is said to revolve around institutional survival above all else, an approach heavily influenced by both William and Princess Anne. And Anne's role in this growing divide reportedly cannot be overstated. Often described as the monarchy's hardest and most disciplined figure, Anne allegedly believes personal feelings must never outweigh the survival of the crown itself. Sources suggest she has encouraged William to think not as a son or brother, but as a future sovereign responsible for preserving the institution against instability at any cost. To supporters, this philosophy represents strength. To critics, it appears emotionally brutal, but insiders claim Charles has increasingly found himself caught between those competing visions of monarchy. One rooted in personal loyalty, the other rooted in institutional endurance. Royal historians have quietly begun drawing parallels to earlier succession crises inside the House of Windsor, moments when aging monarchs watched power gradually migrate toward the next generation, long before official transitions occurred. And according to palace observers, that psychological shift may already be happening now, not publicly, not formally, but subtly, through influence, visibility, and control over the monarchy's future direction. What has made the situation especially emotional for many members of the public is the growing sympathy surrounding Charles himself. Despite years of criticism earlier in life, reports of palace fractures and mounting personal strain have reshaped how many now view the king. Instead of a distant monarch, some increasingly see an aging man confronting the painful realization that history may remember his reign less for triumph and more for the internal battles unfolding during its final chapter. And somewhere within those battles, one quiet figure continued rising through palace calculations, while another royal era appeared to slowly fade before the nation's eyes. And then came the moment that convinced many royal watchers the transition had already unofficially begun. It lasted less than 12 minutes, but royal observers insist it changed everything. As cameras flashed outside Windsor, Prince William deliberately positioned Lady Louise beside senior royals while Camilla's relatives remained conspicuously absent. In palace language, symbolism is never accidental. At first glance, the appearance seemed routine enough. Another carefully managed royal engagement. Another controlled moment of continuity projected toward the public during a period of growing uncertainty surrounding the monarchy. But according to royal commentators, those 12 minutes carried a message far more powerful than any official statement Buckingham Palace could ever release openly. Because within the rigid choreography of royal appearances, placement is hierarchy, proximity is trust, and visibility is power. Almost immediately, media analysts began dissecting every detail surrounding Louise's presence. Why was she positioned so prominently beside William? Why did senior aides reportedly reorganize portions of the engagement at the last minute? And perhaps most notably of all, why did the palace refuse to clarify whether Louise's appearance signaled an expansion of her long-term ceremonial role inside the institution? The question spread quickly across Britain's royal media landscape. Body language experts interviewed by several tabloids claimed William appeared unusually protective toward Louise throughout the appearance, subtly guiding conversations and ensuring she remained visibly integrated within the senior royal circle at every moment. According to some commentators, it resembled less a temporary family inclusion and more the quiet introduction of someone being prepared for future institutional significance. While critics dismissed such interpretations as exaggerated speculation, insiders whispered that palace symbolism rarely happens by accident, especially during periods of transition. Then came the phrase that transformed a simple appearance into a national conversation: a visual succession message. That was how multiple royal commentators described the moment in the days that followed. Not because Louise herself stands anywhere near the direct line of succession, but because her visibility reportedly represented something much larger. William signaling the kind of monarchy he intends to build once the transition of power fully arrives. Smaller, tighter, focused on loyalty, discipline, and controlled public service rather than expansive personal influence networks orbiting the crown. And the palace's refusal to address the speculation only intensified the frenzy. According to royal correspondence, aides repeatedly declined opportunities to explain Louise's evolving visibility, offering only vague references to family support and continuity. But for experienced palace watchers, silence itself became part of the message. Buckingham Palace has long understood that unanswered questions often shape public perception more effectively than direct clarification ever could. And as theories spread online, that silence allowed the symbolism to grow larger with every passing day. Across social media, royal communities erupted into competing interpretations of what many now viewed as evidence of deeper restructuring inside the monarchy. Some claimed William was preparing a trusted inner circle ahead of his reign. Others argued the moment reflected Princess Anne's growing influence behind the scenes, particularly her reported support for elevating royals committed to traditional institutional duty. Meanwhile, critics accused the palace of quietly sidelining figures connected to Charles's personal world in favor of a future-oriented royal structure centered entirely around William's vision. Comparisons to the gradual rise of William and Catherine during Queen Elizabeth II's later years only fueled those suspicions further. Royal historians noted how the late Queen had slowly increased the visibility and authority of the Waleses long before formal transitions occurred, subtly preparing the public for the monarchy's future through carefully managed appearances and symbolic positioning. To many observers, Louise's sudden prominence now appeared eerily similar, a quiet signal that the next era of Windsor leadership was already taking shape beneath the surface. And throughout all of it, Queen Camilla reportedly maintained absolute public composure. Sources close to the palace claim the Queen understood the danger of appearing reactive during such a sensitive period, even as speculation surrounding her family's diminishing visibility intensified. But royal insiders insist the emotional strain behind palace walls has become impossible to ignore. Because while Camilla outwardly projected stability, headlines increasingly focused on one emerging narrative dominating Britain's tabloids: the silent rise of Lady Louise. It was a phrase repeated everywhere. In opinion columns, in television panels, across royal forums and newspaper editorials, quietly at first, then relentlessly. and with every repetition, the perception grew stronger that William was sending a message not only about Louise herself, but about who would and would not shape the monarchy after Charles. Yet for all the public fascinations surrounding those 12 carefully orchestrated minutes, insiders claim the true conflict was still unfolding far away from cameras and official appearances. Because beneath the surface symbolism, the struggle over the crown's future had reportedly entered an even more dangerous phase. One involving loyalty, influence, and the painful realization that not everyone inside the House of Windsor would emerge from the transition untouched. But behind the palace gates, insiders claim the struggle over the monarchy's future was far from over. The monarchy was never merely a family, it was always a fortress. And according to palace whispers, Prince William has now decided exactly who will stand inside its walls when the next reign begins. Behind the polished rituals and carefully rehearsed language of royal continuity, insiders claim an entirely different reality is unfolding beneath the surface of the House of Windsor. What appears publicly as a slow adjustment during King Charles's illness is reportedly something far more strategic behind closed doors. A calculated effort to reshape the monarchy into a smaller, harder, and more disciplined institution before William ever formally ascends the throne. And according to those familiar with palace operations, that transformation is already well underway. For decades, the monarchy expanded outward through marriages, extended family associations, and carefully balanced personal alliances that allowed multiple circles of influence to exist around the crown at once. But reports suggest William no longer views that structure as sustainable in an era where scandal travels globally within seconds and private tensions rapidly become public warfare. Sources close to the future king claim he believes the survival of the monarchy now depends on drastic simplification, fewer voices, fewer competing agendas, and far tighter control over who represents the institution. That philosophy reportedly explains why trusted bloodline royals are increasingly being prioritized over broader blended family influence networks surrounding the palace. According to royal insiders, William's future monarchy is being quietly shaped around individuals viewed as institutionally dependable rather than socially connected. And at the center of that emerging structure stand several familiar figures whose influence has steadily expanded during Charles's reign. Princess Anne, Prince Edward, Sophie, and now increasingly Lady Louise herself. Anne's role in particular has reportedly become immense. Often described by palace staff as the guardian of institutional continuity, Anne is said to have emerged as one of the most powerful behind-the-scenes forces guiding William through this transition period. Reports suggest her influence stretches far beyond ceremonial appearances, touching strategic planning, internal discipline, and long-term royal structure. According to insiders, Anne has spent years warning senior royals that unchecked personal ambition and emotional instability could one day fracture public trust in the crown itself. Now, many believe William has fully embraced that warning. At the same time, Prince Edward and Sophie have reportedly become increasingly visible within senior palace discussions tied to the monarchy's future. Unlike more controversial royal figures, Edward's branch of the family has long been associated with quiet service, minimal scandal, and unwavering institutional loyalty. Sources familiar with royal planning suggest William deeply values those qualities as he prepares for the enormous pressures awaiting his reign. To many inside the palace, Edward and Sophie now represent the kind of stable royal partnership William believes the institution must prioritize moving forward. But for Camilla's camp, insiders claim these developments have triggered growing fear about what happens after Charles. Reports suggest there is rising concern among those closest to the Queen that once William assumes the throne, the influence surrounding Charles's personal household could rapidly diminish, not through public humiliation or open conflict, but through the slow institutional freezing out already whispered about inside palace corridors. Invitations reduced, visibility narrowed, influence quietly redirected elsewhere. According to various interpretations of internal discussions, the fear is not immediate exile, but gradual irrelevance. Royal historians argue this pattern is not new. Again and again throughout British history, monarchies survived moments of instability not through popularity, but through discipline and ruthless consolidation during periods of transition. And insiders claim William is studying those lessons carefully. The future king reportedly views the last several years as proof that internal scandal can weaken the monarchy far more effectively than outside political criticism ever could. That belief, according to palace observers, now shapes nearly every strategic decision unfolding behind the scenes. And nowhere is that strategy more symbolically visible than in the growing presence of Lady Louise Windsor. What once seemed like harmless ceremonial appearances are now increasingly interpreted as part of a much larger message about the next generation of monarchy William intends to build. Louise is no longer viewed simply as the quiet granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II. According to royal commentators, she has become something far more significant, a symbol of stable duty in an institution desperate to restore public confidence after years of turbulence. No drama, no self-promotion, no appetite for royal celebrity, just silence, discipline, continuity. And perhaps that is exactly why her rise has unsettled so many people inside the broader royal orbit. Because if William truly is building a monarchy centered around controlled loyalty rather than expansive personal relationships, then every appearance, every reshuffle, and every carefully managed public signal points toward the same unavoidable reality. The next reign may look dramatically different from the one Britain sees today, and in the end the battle was never truly about titles, appearances, or palace access. It was about legacy itself. As the gates of Windsor closed under the fading evening light, one truth reportedly echoed through the highest levels of the palace. The monarchy had entered a new era long before the public was meant to notice, and Lady Louise Windsor may be one of its quietest architects. For months, perhaps even years, the signs had been there. Small adjustments hidden beneath royal routine, carefully calculated appearances, quiet shifts in influence that seemed insignificant in isolation, but, when viewed together, revealed something far larger unfolding inside the House of Windsor. According to palace insiders, Prince William's long-term vision for the monarchy was never simply about modernizing the institution. It was about stabilizing it after one of the most turbulent periods in its modern history. And to those closest to the future king, stability could only return through discipline, restraint, and a ruthless narrowing of who truly represented the crown. That vision, insiders claim, explains why Lady Louise's rise carried such enormous symbolic weight. Unlike so many royal figures pulled into cycles of publicity, controversy, and emotional exposure, Louise reportedly became associated with something increasingly rare inside the monarchy: quiet endurance. No public battles, no attempts to command headlines, no desire to turn royal identity into personal spectacle. Sources close to palace operations suggest William viewed those qualities not as weaknesses, but as essential to the monarchy's survival in a world where public trust had grown fragile and unpredictable. In many ways, Louise came to symbolize the exact opposite of the chaos that had repeatedly threatened to consume the institution. And while her visibility slowly increased, another reality was reportedly becoming impossible to avoid. Camilla's wider family circle, once expected by many observers to maintain growing influence throughout Charles's reign, allegedly found itself drifting toward a far more distant ceremonial position within the future structure of the monarchy. Reports suggest this was never executed through open confrontation or humiliation, but through something far colder. Distance. Invitations became narrower. Visibility became rarer. Strategic influence reportedly shifted elsewhere. To royal historians, it reflected one of the oldest truths about monarchy. Transitions are rarely announced when they begin. They are felt slowly, through silence, absence, and changing proximity to power. At the center of all of it stood King Charles himself. According to various interpretations of palace sentiment, Charles's reign is increasingly being viewed not as the defining future of the monarchy, but as the difficult bridge between two royal eras, the emotional and fractured turbulence inherited from the past, and the tightly controlled institutional order William now appears determined to create. It is a painful reality for a king who spent most of his life waiting for the throne. Yet insiders claim Charles understands better than most that the crown has never truly belonged to any single individual. It survives only by adapting, hardening, and enduring through periods of immense internal strain. And perhaps that is why palace staff reportedly describe an icy peace settling across royal operations in recent months. Not harmony, not reconciliation, just acceptance. Acceptance that the future court is already forming. Acceptance that William's authority inside palace structures has expanded dramatically. Acceptance that Princess Anne's influence has become deeply embedded in the monarchy's next chapter. Acceptance that certain royal relationships will never fully recover from the fractures of recent years. And above all, acceptance that the institution itself will always place continuity above emotion when forced to choose between the two. Throughout these changes, the lingering shadow of Queen Elizabeth II reportedly remains impossible to ignore. Royal insiders often speak of her influence as something that still shapes palace decisions from beyond the grave. Her philosophy of restraint, sacrifice, and unwavering duty continues guiding those now preparing the monarchy for its next era. And according to sources close to William's circle, much of what's happening today reflects lessons learned during the final years of Elizabeth's reign. Lessons about silence, endurance, and protecting the institution even when personal relationships suffer in the process. Because in the end, monarchy has never been sustained by comfort. It survives through sacrifice, through figures willing to disappear into duty without demanding recognition in return. And perhaps that is why Lady Louise's role resonates so powerfully within this unfolding royal transformation. Not because she sought influence, but because, according to palace whispers, she never needed to. While louder voices fought for visibility, she remained still. While others attempted to reshape the monarchy around themselves, she quietly adapted herself to the monarchy instead. And in doing so, she reportedly became exactly the kind of figure William believes the institution must protect if it hopes to survive the decades ahead. Because inside the House of Windsor, history remembers not those who reach closest to the crown, but those entrusted to protect it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.